50 years ago, 4 out of 5 people in China worked the land. Almost the entire country lived in poverty, surviving on less than $1 a day. Rice paddies stretched from horizon to horizon. A hoe was the farmer's only tool. Today, China builds more ships than the rest of the world combined. It manufactures nearly a third of everything sold on the planet. It runs the largest high-speed rail network on Earth, and sends astronauts into orbit. All of this under one ruling party. No elections, no open press. None of the things Western economies take for granted. So how did a country written off as backward for 2 centuries claw its way to the top? The answer runs through empires, opium, revolution, and a famine that killed tens of millions. It ends with the rise of the second largest economy on Earth. Here is the full story. Civilization first appeared in Mesopotamia, in modern Iraq, about 6,000 years ago. Egypt and the Indus Valley followed within 1,000 years. China came later, around 1600 BCE, with the Shang dynasty on the Yellow River. Almost every early civilization eventually collapsed or vanished. China is the one that never did. But early China was not one country. It was a patchwork of rival kingdoms, each with its own army and king. That changed in 221 BCE, when the ruler of the Qin state crushed his rivals. He declared himself the first emperor of a unified China. He is the man buried outside modern Xi'an, with 8,000 terracotta soldiers standing guard. Under his dynasty, and the ones that followed, Chinese territory kept expanding. Trade with the rest of Asia expanded right along with it. That trade became the Silk Road, a caravan route carrying silk, tea, and porcelain to Rome. China guarded its manufacturing secrets fiercely. Smuggling silkworms out carried the death penalty. Byzantine Emperor Justinian wanted silk for himself. Around 552 CE, he sent 2 monks to steal eggs. They smuggled them home hidden inside hollow bamboo canes. Geography did most of the guarding on its own. Mountains blocked the west, desert the north, dense jungle blocked the south. A handful of merchants made the journey. No army ever did. That isolation bred a very specific worldview. Chinese scholars called their empire the Middle Kingdom, the center of civilization. Everyone else was chaotic and barbarian, by definition. Portuguese ships reached the southern port of Guangzhou in the early 1500s. Spanish, Dutch, and British traders followed, all chasing the same silk, tea, and porcelain. The Qing court let them trade only in Guangzhou, nowhere else. No settling inland, no bringing families, and only one accepted currency, silver. China had almost none of its own. Between the 1500s and 1800s, roughly 80% of world silver came from Mexico, Peru, and Bolivia. A third of that Mexican silver crossed the Pacific just to pay for Chinese goods. China, meanwhile, needed almost nothing from Europe in return. With a population near 170 million, larger than all of Europe, the empire was nearly self-sufficient. In 1793, Britain sent Lord Macartney to Beijing, asking for more open ports. Emperor Qianlong's written reply survives to this day. "We possess all things," he wrote. "I have no use for your manufactures." Before the 1800s, China's share of the global economy sat near a quarter of world output. That matched its share of world population almost exactly. The economy prized stability over growth. Europe had no such stability. Dozens of kingdoms fought constantly over territory and trade. That constant fighting forced constant innovation. Gunpowder proves the point. China invented it around the 9th century, and used it mostly for fireworks. By the time the formula reached Europe, 2 centuries later, everything changed. Rival kingdoms turned it into cannons and muskets. Firepower now meant military strength. That arms race funded colonial conquest across Africa, the Americas, and Asia. Britain came out on top, building factories that mass-produced rifles. The same country would soon bring the Qing Empire to its knees. Opium had circulated in China for centuries, mostly as a painkiller. The trouble started once people learned to smoke it mixed with tobacco. Europeans had brought tobacco from the Americas, and it caught on fast. The morphine in opium smoke is brutally addictive. British merchants noticed. They planted vast poppy fields across their Indian colonies and shipped the harvest to China. Chinese silver drained into British coffers, one pipe at a time. Emperor Jia banned opium imports in 1800. Smugglers ignored him completely. Over the next 40 years, opium shipments into China grew roughly ninefold. By some estimates, 1 in 4 adult men in the country had become addicts. In 1839, official Lin Zexu ordered British merchants to surrender their opium. They refused at first, then handed over more than 1,000 tons. Chinese officials destroyed all of it on the beach at Humen. Lin wrote directly to Queen Victoria, asking where Britain's conscience had gone. The letter never reached her. Britain had its pretext. A Royal Navy fleet was already off the coast. The First Opium War began. Roughly 4,000 British troops, backed by modern warships, crushed a Qing force many times their size. The 1842 Treaty of Nanking made the cost explicit. China paid an indemnity of 8 million kilograms of silver. It ceded Hong Kong to Britain, permanently, and opened 5 ports to foreign trade. Each one sat under a measure of foreign control. A second war followed in 1856, after officials seized a British ship. China lost that one too, and had to legalize the opium trade it had fought to stop. At its peak, opium sales made up roughly half of all British trade revenue from China. China never became a colony outright, unlike India. But foreign powers carved out ports, wrote their own laws inside them. They treated the emperor's authority as optional. Chinese historians called this the Century of Humiliation. Imagine being the strongest empire on the planet. One king's once traveled oceans to visit. Then watching outsiders occupy pieces of your own coastline. The emperor's authority never recovered. China slid towards civil war. By the early 1900s, China's economy was in crisis, and its intellectuals were furious. Nearby Japan had faced similar humiliation decades earlier, then modernized into an imperial power. China wanted the same outcome, but reform came too slowly to satisfy anyone. In 1911, the Xinhai Revolution forced the last Qing emperor off the throne. He was 6 years old. What followed was fragmentation. Regional warlords carved the country into fighting fiefdoms. 2 political movements eventually rose above the chaos. The Communist Party drew strength from Russia's example and China's vast peasant population. The Nationalist Party, the Kuomintang, was backed by industrialists and merchants. Instead, Japan invaded in 1937, and the 2 factions called an uneasy truce. Kuomintang armies took the fighting head-on, and paid heavily for it. Communist guerrillas harassed Japanese supply lines from the shadows instead. They emerged from the war stronger than when it began. When Japan surrendered in 1945, civil war resumed almost immediately. The Kuomintang was riddled with corruption. Popular support swung toward the communists. On October 1, 1949, Mao Zedong declared the founding of the People's Republic. Kuomintang forces retreated to Taiwan, kept safe by American naval protection. Mao's rule lasted from 1949 to 1976, one of the most contradictory chapters in Chinese history. The party nationalized industry, collectivized farmland, and rebuilt the economy around Soviet planning. Soviet money, machinery, and engineers backed the whole effort. In 1958, Mao launched the Great Leap. Double farm output, 6-fold industrial output. Steel obsessed him. He wanted China's output to overtake Britain's within 15 years. The plan ignored a basic problem. China had neither the technology nor the workforce. Villages were reorganized into communes. Farmers were sent to makeshift backyard furnaces. They melted down tools, pots, anything that would melt. Crops rotted in the fields while the furnaces produced steel too brittle to use. Mao also declared war on sparrows, blaming them for eating the harvest. The campaign killed close to 1 billion birds nationwide within a few years. Grain yields rose briefly, until officials realized sparrows also ate crop-destroying insects. By 1960, China imported 250,000 sparrows from the Soviet Union to rebuild the population. The famine that followed is one of the deadliest in recorded history. Estimates of the death toll range from 20 to 45 million people. The party quietly walked back the policy and blamed local officials for the failure. 10 more years of communist rule did little to close the technology gap. By 1976, the year Mao died, 4 in 5 Chinese still worked the land, using a hoe rather than a tractor. 96% still lived below the poverty line. Deng Xiaoping took the party's reins after Mao's death. He had marched through revolution and civil war right alongside Mao himself. But he rejected Mao's rigid split between capitalist and socialist policy. His own line became famous. It doesn't matter if a cat is black or white, as long as it catches mice. At a party meeting in December 1978, Deng announced a new direction. Blind loyalty to Mao's old doctrine was over. Results now mattered more than ideology. The clearest proof came from an unlikely place, a village called Shaogang, in Anhui. In late 1978, its farmers secretly agreed to split up the collective farmland. They handed over the government's quota and kept the surplus for themselves. Output jumped within a single year. Under Mao, that kind of quiet rule-breaking could have meant prison. Under Deng, the party studied the results and rolled the system out nationwide. By 1984, China's old collective farms had almost entirely disappeared. Farmers who met their quota could sell the rest on the open market. Agricultural output rose more than 50% over the next 5 years. Deng also sent officials abroad to study what worked elsewhere. In spring 1978, a delegation toured Western Europe and Southeast Asia. They took notes on factories, ports, and trade policy the whole way. In 1980, the government named 4 coastal cities special economic zones. Foreign companies there got tax breaks and exemptions from import duties. China's real advantage was the price of its labor. The largest population on Earth, still climbing out of poverty, meant far lower wages. Shenzhen shows the scale of it best. Its GDP was 196 million yuan in 1979. It crossed 2.5 trillion yuan by 2019. Local officials across the country competed to attract foreign investment. Career advancement increasingly depended on economic results, not ideology. The system stayed authoritarian throughout. Banknotes still carry Mao's portrait, not Deng's. Criticizing Mao directly remains close to impossible inside the party. Until the mid-1980s, foreign firms could only enter China through joint ventures. Foreign partners brought capital and technology. Chinese partners handled logistics and staffing. That let Chinese manufacturers study foreign technology up close and reproduce it. Compare a 2003 Chevrolet Spark with a 2006 Chery QQ built in China. The resemblance is hard to miss. Government R&D spending climbed fast through the 2000s, overtaking Japan and the EU combined. Subsidies followed the same pattern, favoring Chinese companies over foreign firms. Cheap labor, borrowed technology, and state backing let Chinese firms undercut competitors on price. Eventually, some firms bought their competitors outright. Geely bought Sweden's Volvo cars in 2010. Lenovo bought Motorola from Google in 2014. High-speed rail tells a similar story of catching up fast. China imported the technology from Germany's Siemens and France's Alstom in the early 2000s. By 2007, its own state rail company built its first domestic high-speed train. By 2015, that company was outproducing Siemens and Alstom's rail divisions combined. Germany's own rail operator even considered buying Chinese trains instead of German ones. They cost less and matched the quality. China joined the World Trade Organization in 2001, and output climbed almost without pause. Manufacturing now makes up close to 40% of China's economy. More than in almost any other large economy on Earth. It produces goods for the entire planet. American and European manufacturers felt the pressure. Washington pushed back, starting with tariffs. In 2016, Trump targeted foreign steel. Chinese steel products, specifically, got hit with duties up to 260%. In 2022, the Biden administration barred Huawei equipment from the American market entirely. Here is the contradiction at the center of it. The US and EU remain China's largest export markets and want to slow its rise. But both keep buying Chinese goods because the price is hard to beat. China has built its own leverage abroad too. Take Sri Lanka's Hambantota port. Unable to repay its loans, China took the port on a 99-year lease instead. That gives China a foothold in the Indian Ocean that unsettles India. India has long treated that ocean as its own backyard. The Belt and Road Initiative extends the same strategy across dozens of countries. Ports, railways, and highways keep Chinese trade independent of choke points like the Suez Canal. Copying an existing technology is fast. Inventing the next one from scratch is not. China's growth has cooled as it shifts from one to the other. Growth above 8% a year was routine in the 2000s. It now tracks closer to the pace of the American economy. Demographics make the problem worse. Population peaked around 2021 and has fallen since. India has already overtaken China as the world's most populous country. The one-child policy ran from 1979 to 2015, curbing growth as intended. But it also aged the population faster than almost anywhere else. That strains a pension system built for a much younger country. The policy had another consequence. Some families ended pregnancies of expected daughters. That left China with a stark gender imbalance among young adults. Millions of men now statistically cannot find a wife. Domestic consumption tells its own story. Household spending struggles to keep pace. It makes up roughly 40% of GDP in developed economies. In China, that figure sits closer to the low 50s and has stalled. Entire neighborhoods of finished, unsold apartment blocks sit empty across Chinese cities, a visible symptom of an economy built to produce more than it consumes. Rising wages have chipped away at the labor edge that built Shenzhen in the first place. Intel, Nike, and Microsoft have discussed shifting production toward Vietnam, Bangladesh, or Mexico. Foreign direct investment into China has fallen for the first time in a quarter century. China spent 4,000 years building the oldest continuous civilization on the planet. It lost a century of that to opium, invasion, and civil war, and clawed back to the edge of global economic leadership in barely 40 years. Whether that climb keeps going, or stalls under its own weight and foreign pushback, may be the defining economic question of the next 10 years.